and welcome to Reclaiming My Mind. I'm your host, Jessica Vaughn. And I just want to say we are super excited to start our Get to Know Your Candidate series. And this is the first one we're having because you need to know about the people who are going to be on your ballot, right? And there's not a lot of ways to find out. So thank you for listening to the 2026 Get to Know Your Candidate series. And I am super excited because today we have on a candidate for County Commission, District 5, Countywide, which means anybody can vote in Hillsborough County for this candidate, Neil Manimala. Did I say that right?
You said it right.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming. It's great to have you, Neil.
I'm so happy to be here.
Welcome. Full disclosure, you're the only candidate's kickoff party that I've gone to so far this year.
Thank you.
It was a great kickoff party, by the way.
I think we may have broken fire code for like a few minutes because of how many people came. We were so fortunate to have folks come out, and I really appreciate you being there.
Of course, and I think that speaks to the momentum that I've already seen around your campaign, which is really, really exciting. But before we jump into that, tell me just a little bit about yourself. Who is Neil, and why are you running for County Commission?
So thank you, Jessica. I am a medical doctor, a new dad to a almost 3-month-old daughter.
Congratulations, she's gorgeous.
Thank you. And a Valrico native who is running for the Hillsborough County Commission because I believe dignity's got to be at the heart of everything that we do in our politics. And I do believe that starts at a local level. I hear from people all over the county, all over our region, from all sides of the political spectrum, who are fed up with what direction our nation is taking, what direction our capital up in Tallahassee is taking on the stateside level, and just want to see decency once more present in our government. And I do believe that there's going to be a lot of battlefields for that come November of 2026 this year, but I think the biggest one is going to be on the local level.
Okay, so I love that. I mean, hopefully most Americans or people would, love the word decency. I don't know. I'm so confused by which words are good and bad anymore and where we're going as a society. But I mean, in general, what does that look like to you? What does that mean? What does the word decency mean in the context that you're using it when you say that's what you want to bring to the county commission?
Well, I think, when I was growing up out in Valrico, Brandon, we were represented by, for some time, by someone by the name of Rhonda Storms. She was on the county commission. She served in different levels of government. And back then, the biggest level of controversy on the county commission was, well, what kind of hat was Rhonda Storms wearing? And there's some other things that she also said that was kind of bad.
I mean, I protested her trying to take LGBTQ stuff out of our public libraries, but okay, yeah.
Yes, I'm very cognizant of that. That was a huge problem too. But that was. But I will tell you that was a time in which, you were able to see someone on the other side of the political spectrum and you were able to shake hands with them. Right. And, you were able to have gentlemen or gentlewomen's agreements with them. And really, I think so much of my politics and the way I view decency in this arena is guided by my faith. I'm a Catholic, a Christian. Matthew 25 is what guides me. It's a verse that says, whatever you do unto the least of these, my brother and sister, you do unto me. And that's how we got to go about looking at our fellow residents in Hillsborough County. Whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, we're all in one big community, multiple neighborhoods, but whether I'm in Keystone all the way down to Waimama, yes, on the surface level, a lot of the issues are different and the things that people bring up are different, but deep down, everybody just wants to feel like they're heard and that they want to see a reflection of themselves in our politics and our government. And when we say decency, we say people feeling like they're all at the table together.
So kind of like what you would think a real Christian would be and Christ's actual messaging is what you're saying.
We're not talking about exploitation, domination, oppression. We're not talking about taking those on the margins and kicking them to the curb or using them as a scapegoat. No, we're talking about all of us together as one community and sometimes turning the other cheek.
And I love that. I mean, I agree, even as a self-identified progressive Democrat, it's funny because, I try to work across the aisle. I have good relationships with a lot of my Republican colleagues, I have Republican friends, even though we're polar opposites on how we see things politically, we always find a way, to come together on other issues or just about our families or about our lives. Because I think that's what you're talking about, right? Like we used to be people who could disagree, but we all had, kind of a common understanding of the direction that we wanted things to go.
I think it's easy to lose hope in that when you get too far down the vortex of Facebook comments and you have your cable news on or your social media algorithm spins you out of control in terms of your hope for our ability to come together as human beings. But I do think that, especially on a local level, we obviously share one common home. Right? We all share the same traffic. We all share so many of the similar issues as it relates to housing affordability and being able to continue to live here. Utilities costs affect all of us. Flooding doesn't care about your socioeconomic status necessarily, doesn't care about political boundaries, right? All these issues are affecting us here in Hillsborough County and Tampa Bay as a whole. And I think that, that's how we're able to drive common ground, build consensus. Everybody's got a few different things that are important to them, but at the end of the day, deep down, we all want to be one.
I mean, I agree. I think so. And I think if you look at when you cut through the rhetoric and you cut through the things that people are using to divide us, the certain issues or the terminology that they know will inflame each other. I think when you get down to the issues and you talk about what we all want, I agree that for the most part, we all want the same thing, right? Like access to good education, a safe community where we feel safe and we feel a part of things. So I agree. I guess what question I'm wondering, and I'll probably touch on this more as we come back because it was already kind of on my list of things, is that's great. We both love that, but we know the political environment we're in. The makeup of county commission right now. If elected, when elected, even going in there with the best intentions, if you have colleagues who don't share that vision, who don't want to invest in the community equally, who thrive on that anger and division to kind of keep the momentum going of whatever their political agenda is, how do you feel like you're going to be able to navigate what you want and why you're running and your vision within the structure that you need to be going into?
I think that folks who are coming in with a vision for decency, certainly a political newcomer like myself who has never run for office before, it's important to kind of we'll talk about consensus building and what that looks like for the commission in a minute, especially, as we kind of go further along in our conversation. But, I just want to say that I am not naive to, the fact that politics is very dirty. Politics is a place where, I run for office and I have thick skin, but I also expect that, they're going to be attacking my wife. They're going to be attacking my baby. They're going to be attacking all my family and friends. And, they're going to be labeling me as that brown guy with a beard, who's trying to bring some type of, leftist, communism or whatever to Hillsborough County. And they're going to scaremonger and talk about the us versus them.
For sure.
I'm 35 years old, Jessica, and I grew up in Valrico, certainly in a very tolerant community, right? And I was 18, my first ever election where I voted, but also the first ever election in which I was plugged in to the core in terms of volunteering and getting out the vote and knocking on doors, canvassing, was the Obama campaign. And I saw, that time of that political maturation in my 20s was defined by those years. You got that first term of Obama coming in and talking about bipartisanship, talking about a lot of things I'm talking about right now, and really being able to meet folks on the other side of the aisle, being able to pass the ACA, being able to do so much in that term. But then the second term happened. Right. And a lot of good things happened there, too. But you also saw that a Mr. Rogers approach to politics could only take you so far.
Right.
Because before you know it, you're going to have Merrick Garland up for confirmation for the Supreme Court. And then the rug get pulled out from under you. Right. So, when I think of that in that context, because, it wasn't just Obama who got stabbed in the back by the indecency of that politics. It was millions upon millions of people, folks like my daughter, who is now going to grow up in a post-Roe America, right? And so we think about all the people who are relying on you to not play defense anymore, but play offense. my general thought is I give everybody one shot to prove me wrong, right? I don't come in with guns blazing necessarily, but I always have them in my pocket, right? And it's important to stick true to your values. You compromise where compromise is needed. There are some things that I, perhaps care more deeply about in terms of agenda and platform and whatnot, where we can build consensus and compromise, but there's some things that we're not going to do that for. And these are things that's important that people know where I'm at, because I'm a representative of the people of Hillsborough County.
For sure. And I think, as an elected official on the school board, by the way, here's my public service announcement. This podcast is me as an individual, not as a school board member, Jessica Vaughn. These views are completely my own. They're separate from the school board. I like to kind of do a public service announcement, and this is a good segue. But even things, your opinion changes, I think, is sometimes on issues as you see them in the whole and the context and, what the decisions, who they affect. So, I think that no matter what your platform is or what, I think your values are going to guide you more through your service than whatever platform you have, because
Absolutely.
The world is changing.
Absolutely.
But before we jump into your platform, because I think that's where we should go when, people want to get to know you, tell me a little bit more about yourself. So you're a physician. You grew up in Valrico. I know before, when you were here and we were kind of chatting, you talked about some of the schools that you went here, kind of homegrown. You went to middle school. Where'd you go?
I went to Young Middle School.
Young Middle School. Okay. And then you went to high school at
King High.
At King, so Temple Terrace.
Right.
Temple Terrace area.
All over the county. And I'll tell you this, Jessica, a lot of my story as the son of immigrants begins with talking about my folks, right? My parents grew up or are from South India, Kerala, which is a state in South India.
Dying to go to Kerala.
Kerala's great.
So beautiful.
They call it God's own country. It's beautiful. But they both grew up on farms there. And my mom was one of 10 siblings. And they came to this country with not much more in their suitcases than faith in the American dream. And they believed in their core, they still do, despite all the craziness that's happening right now, especially to immigrants in this country, that this place is still a bastion of hope, the city on the hill, as they say. And we were blessed to be able to, we came through Chicago, and that's where I was born, but we moved down to Valrico when I was 5 years old. And like I said, really tolerant communities, communities where we were just so welcomed as people of color. And there were a lot of people of color. And now Brandon and Valrico are just full of folks who are brown, black, yellow and white and everything, every shade, right? And everybody, I think, still gets along well, where there can be tensions in every part of the county, or sometimes when we get so big that we fail to talk to each other.
Yeah.
Right? But I went to Buckhorn Elementary over in Valrico, and then I was fortunate enough to go to one of the magnet schools, Young Middle School, and a lot of my friends ended up going to King, and then I ended up going to King, and that was great. And then I graduated from USF for college and medical school.
Wow.
I was able to stay here.
Wow.
Which was incredible. And Lord knows I was not the most focused student in middle school and high school. And I'm very fortunate to have good mentors and people to kind of whip me into shape a little bit, to be able to kind of get in to medical school as time went on. And now I'm fortunate to serve as a urologist after finishing surgical training at USF again, in the very community that helped raise me in Valrico.
Yeah, so you're deeply embedded in Hillsborough with experiences all over different parts of Hillsborough County. So I think that gives you a perspective of being able to, like you said, see it from so many different neighborhoods and communities, because, you're kind of sprinkled throughout. And you said you're a new father, right?
I'm a new dad.
This is you've just had your first daughter.
Yeah.
She's how old now? 3 months?
Almost 3 months old. She's it's incredible, Jessica. She just started repeating oohs and ahs now, which is like crazy. Yesterday, she's discovered her feet. Every day there's something new. I'm one of those dads who walks around with a picture for every single day. And I think about it from a generational standpoint. Like, her name is Miriam. She's named after my maternal grandmother, Mariamma. And in so many ways, we're honoring her legacy because, my maternal grandma, she grew up under the British Empire in India, raised 10 kids, on the farm. And my uncles and aunts would always tell me, like, if she was born in any other day or any other age, she would have become Secretary of State because of how outspoken she was, how fiery she was, how much passion was in her heart.
Yeah.
And we honor her legacy in naming my daughter Miriam. And truly, I think about the opportunities that my parents had, and they certainly worked hard, and they were fortunate enough to be in a country like this where I had more opportunities than they ever had growing up. I want to be sure that my daughter has more opportunities than I had.
Of course,
and the trajectory we're taking, certainly as a nation, a state, and unfortunately as a county, is pushing back against that desire and that goal. And in so many ways, so many parents, and even if you're not a parent, even if you're someone who cares about the next generation, right, and you don't have kids, you want to be pushing for that too.
I mean, definitely. I think we were even talking about how, when you first got here, now that you're running for county commission, and you're also, doing your job full time as a doctor, how, everything that you do now is a measure of time of being away from your kid. And that's something I really, really, relate to. Is there's so many things, unfortunately, that I have to say no to that I want to be at all the time because, I want to be there for my kids. So, it's a real commitment and sacrifice to run for public service. Like, I don't think people really understand if you're doing it right. It's service,
It is.
So I appreciate everyone who steps up and takes a chance for that.
It is. You have to be going at 150%. And I will tell you, as much as I really do. When made the decision, I to run for office, I first had to ask my wife Rachel, and then I had to, ask God after that, and ask all the other partners, in my practice, and all the members of my community, and really reflect on it. And I'll tell you this: I mean, it's so driven by calling, right? There is something to be said about having a kid in the abstract. Rachel was pregnant at the time, and now having the kid in person and actually in human form, and as you hit the nail on the head, every fiber of your being wants to be there with her. Being a good dad involves presence, physically, certainly, obviously, and I want to be there all the time, but another part of it is planting the seeds for a better future for her.
100%.
And some of this fight that we're taking. And we'll talk more about, I think, the journey through organized medicine and advocacy, and kind of how I essentially kind of was like, man, I got to get in this race for the commission itself. But certainly that'll be something we can talk about.
Well, let's talk about your platform, right? Because I don't think, and let's back up for our listeners, because I'm always surprised, honestly, by the people who listen to my podcast. You never know who's going to be listening to it. I got a message about someone who listened to the one we did last week that I was really surprised about. So, but let's start for people who might be listening for the first time, right? So county commission, obviously, is what makes the decisions for Hillsborough County, anyone who lives in Hillsborough County. And if you don't live in the city of Tampa, county commission, and you're in the incorporated area, that's your main governing body, right? I mean, I live in Tampa, so I have the commission and I have the city of Tampa. But when I lived in Carrollwood, we weren't part of the city. So all I had was the county commission. So you're running for county commission. There's how many members on county commission?
7 members of the county commission.
Right now.
Right.
There is going to be something on people's ballots that they're passing through to try to make it 9 single member, which is a whole other thing.
Some behind the scenes
as of this minute,
7 county commissioners.
7 county commissioners, and it's broken up similar to the school board, where there's some that represent a district. So if you took Hillsborough County and you cut it up into how many district specific?
There's 4 single member districts.
Districts.
And then there's 3 at-large county commissioners.
Which means that's they represent the whole county.
They represent the entire county.
So myself, when I'm looking to see who represents me on county commission, it's the person who represents the district, the part of the 1/4 of Hillsborough County that I'm in, and 3 at-large members.
3 at-large members. And honestly, the way the charter was written back in the 80s was done in such a way that in theory, any resident of Hillsborough County who's voting for these county commissioners, should be all of us, we should all be voting for our county commissioners, could theoretically elect a majority. And every citizen then has the power of the majority in that sense, right? You have your 1 single member and then the 3 at large.
So you have 4 members that represent you.
Exactly.
What you mean by the majority? You have the opportunity to vote for the
sway
majority.
Any vote. Exactly.
But they're not all up for election at the same time,
no.
Obviously, right? You stagger. So how many commissioners are up for election in 2026, which is when your election will be?
4.
There's 4 members up for election.
Yep.
Okay. And you're running County, again, District 5.
District 5.
And then is there an incumbent in that seat right now?
There's someone by the name of Donna Cameron Cepeda.
Okay. And how long has she been on the county commission?
Since 2022.
2022. So she's ending her first term.
She, a lot of listeners may know Mariela Smith, who is someone I look up to deeply, a mentor of mine. I talk to folks from all sides of the aisle, and they're like, she was one of the hardest working public servants.
She's just amazing.
Behind you.
Yeah.
And she's just a great person. But, Donna Cameron Cepeda came in on a red wave back in 2022, and she got into office. And she, along with someone by the name of Joshua Wastel, are two.
That triggers me, that name.
Yeah,
sorry.
My Wastel sense was tingling as well. But I will say those are two of the four that are up for election, and then the other two are Harry Cohen and Gwen Myers, who are the only two Democrats on the county commission.
And long serving. Right?
Yeah, they've been on for a little while. Yeah,
and Harry was on city council before that.
Yep.
Okay, so is there anyone else in your race?
Yeah. So, right now we are, I'm the only Democrat running in this race.
You're the only Democrat.
I'm the only Democrat running in the race. On the Republican side of things, as of this week, almost extremely rare, if not unprecedented move. There is a primary challenger against the incumbent. So someone running against Donna Cameron Cepeda by the name of Stacey Hahn, who is one of your colleagues on the school board.
Yes, and full disclosure, I do like Dr. Hahn. Yes, I do. And now I have Dr. Hahn and Dr. Neil, as I've named you, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Neil. Okay, but you're the only Democrat. That's the important thing for now. Anything could change.
Yeah.
So, not that it should be partisan. It is a partisan race, though, but,
is,
you are the Democrat in the race. So, again, I know I started this conversation and then I kind of segued into giving people voter information, but what's your platform? First of all, what do you see county commission is voting on and doing, and how?
Yeah, I think it's important to take a step back and just think about how much it affects your day to day more than I feel any other form of government. This is what affects you, because we make decisions. This year the budget for the county commission is $12 billion plus.
Wow, I didn't even know that.
Which is a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's billion with a B. And so, we make decisions from related to land use and where we decide to build, right? And what's approved
so
as far
sprawl,
as developers.
gentrification,
the questions of sprawl, housing, right? The question of whether or not we're living in walkable communities where there is infrastructure that meets growth, or if we're packed like sardines serviced by a 2-lane road.
Right.
And that then relates to questions of transit and how our county is connected. When we talk about infrastructure, we talk about wastewater, water out and water in. These are decisions that are decided by the county commission. We decide, the question of land use, converse to that is also a question of environmental protection, right? This is something, there's literally an environmental protection commission, which is all 7 county commissioners, and so,
okay.
That's an extremely important thing to us, because, environmental protection also relates to flood resilience. And so it's important that, anybody thinking about the county commission, and wonders why we don't have the stormwater resilience we're supposed to have, right? Whether it relates to actual infrastructure and, stormwater drains and stormwater pumps that are up to date, or the actual environmental impact of overdevelopment and overgrowth and overbuilding that's unfettered, right? Understand that the county commission is the one that makes the decisions on that. Public safety is a huge part of what the county commission is responsible for. Although people understand that we have a sheriff's department for the county and fire, rescue, and EMS, right? They all get their funding from the county commission. And, there's some of it that kind of goes through, right? That just gets checked off of.
Pass through.
Right, pass through, right? But there's some parts of it that's discretionary, and there's some new things that come up, and certain interlocal agreements sometimes that are impacted. And we'll talk a little bit about that too, as it relates to healthcare and our healthcare plan, which is something that our county commission oversees. There some aspects of where the hands of the county commission kind of spill into are even issues of childcare, and obviously, so there's interplay and agreements as well with the school district as well. So, there's a lot that affects your day to day that's impacted by the county commission, and it's important that people understand that. And so, when we take a step back and think about how we really want to push the envelope for dignity and decency in our government, in our campaign, we're going to be focused on transit. We're going to be focused on some degree of healthcare, which is really important for people across the board. And we're going to be focused on making sure that life and living here is just more affordable. And, that involves the affordability of homeownership, that involves the affordability of childcare, the affordability of, ensuring that, there is some level of infrastructure support for wherever you're living, whether you own your home or you're renting, that your utilities are actually as lower, and that these are things that we can really kind of impact with thoughtful and values driven leadership on the county commission.
Well, I loved how you said that. So let me kind of tell you what I hear and tell me if you think that's right. If I'm just wondering how it affects me, right? Under the things that you mentioned, if there's a hurricane,
yeah,
I want to make sure I don't flood. I mean, we saw over in Forest Hills what happened when the pumps failed, unfortunately, in the last hurricane, and people who were nowhere in the danger of being in a flood zone, their homes flooded and they lost a lot. And a lot of them didn't have flood insurance because their area wasn't projected to be flooding. So like you mentioned, drainage and pumps, those are all very important.
Extremely important.
So when we're talking about how we manage and whether we're resilient through, hurricanes and natural disasters, that comes down to county commission. Transportation. If I own a car, why do I care if there's transportation?
Well, we're talking about making sure roads are kept up to date, and we fill in potholes, the basic service.
100%.
But we also talk about like questions of like how many cars are on the road, and how traffic patterns are like influenced and pushed in certain directions. There's a concept in planning called transit-oriented development. Not to get into the jargon, but it's basically everything it says. You really want to make sure that the interconnectedness of a community, a county as large as Hillsborough County, is planned out. And we keep to the plan. The issue in so many cases is we make a plan, and we actually have a good planning commission filled with folks who actually look at data, science, stuff that I'm used to like dealing with in medicine, right?
Are you talking about our transportation planning commission?
Well, not well. I don't want to get in trouble here, but not the transportation planning commission, not the transportation planning organization, the TPO per se, in part because it's of some of the ways in which politics has driven that a little bit more towards a state Tallahassee's agenda as opposed to our local agenda. Correct. But that's something we'll talk about more. But no, our actual the Hillsborough Planning Commission, which is full of professional planners, and there's some folks who are politically appointed, but they're actual professionals who have actually gone through a certified planning process. I actually remember that.
Why would we want people in positions that have experience and knowledge about the job?
Right. I'm in so much awe. I actually joined the American Planning Association a while back, in part because I appreciate theory. I appreciate reading and understanding how things work well, and also how things.
Kind of a nerd for this stuff. Is what you're
I love it, but I also appreciate how learning how things work well in some places and how things don't work well in other places too, and understanding that experience. Why do we need to repeat the mistakes of history? And I know from medicine as well that there's a difference between theory and practice. Some of Pandora's box in terms of sprawl and a lack of a focus on transit options has been the story of Hillsborough County, but that doesn't mean that we have to put our hands up and give up. And so the reason why I bring that up is because our planning commission is actually relatively good. You come up with a comprehensive plan, and you account for and extrapolate for where growth is going to be.
Extrapolate.
I got to take off my glasses here. I'm being a little bit of a Poindexter here and using the terminology, but projecting and thinking about where growth is going to happen. Like for instance, South County, where there's so much, so many folks moving and so much growth, development, right? And we have to consider like what direction we're taking with that. We got to consider, okay, we're going to build a fire station, based on, for instance, what plan the firefighters come up with, and, obviously listen to all the stakeholders. But, I think that the professionals who are on the ground, who are taking care of people like our first responders, when they have a map and they say, hey, this is where, if growth is going to happen here, this is where we want our fire station, or where we would recommend at least a fire station happen. So we have reduced response times, right? I would prefer to believe them than believe a big developer who has their own separate map, right?
Here we go.
And I say that in part because this is fundamentally a question of who has their thumb on the scale. Is it, folks who donate the most, to candidates? Is it the big developers and special interests, or is it the people?
Yeah. So I'm hearing you might be able to fix my pothole or have something to do with that. You might be able to help with the congestion of traffic that I sit in every single day and want to hold somebody accountable for the fact that no matter what time of day I leave on any of our interstates, I might be sitting in 45 minutes to an hour in traffic to get 12 miles down the road. Now, let's go back because you mentioned this charter. I think it's confusing for people to understand, like, for the school board, we're governed by the state. So that's who we're beholden to. But you mentioned the charter. So county commission kind of has its own, the charter is what governs it. It has its kind of, bylaws, but its own, kind of, I don't know how else you would describe it for people who didn't understand
it's essentially a framework for how the county commission is supposed to work, and how we're supposed to conduct ourselves, and like even and quite literally in this context, like term limits, right? And like how you can run, and how some folks can be on the county commission somehow for 20 plus years and hop from seat to seat, because technically that's allowed by charter, right? But also like this at-large, like countywide seat representation versus the single member district. Technically, and this is, I'm not a constitutional lawyer by any means when it comes to state constitutional law. No, I'm not. Absolutely. Kidding. I know where just like I'm a urologist, just like I would call a cardiologist. If
you know a lot about county commission for urologists, so you might pull anything out here.
There's a lot smarter people than me when it comes to that. But I would say that we're technically still under the purview of the law. I mean, the Tallahassee, and from what I understand, in so many ways, if it really came down to some Supreme Court decision about some question of preemption or something like that, like preemption meaning, if the state comes up with something like, we're going to get rid of fluoride in the water, versus the county comes up with something saying, let's keep fluoride in the water, the state would typically win out on that case, which, in my view is not great, because our local leaders know our communities best.
Yeah. I mean, it's confusing to me because, the Republican Conservative Party has always been smaller government, but you see that change, what you're referring to with your own charter is home rule, right? The ability for local government who are elected by the people to make decisions about their community. And you see that erosion, right? I mean, even if we're talking about changing the structure of county commission, that's not coming necessarily internally. That's coming from legislators who want to put their finger and control these smaller governments and erode home rule, people's ability to make decisions in their own communities.
2 points there. One, yes, I'm a big proponent of home rule, and I sound like a Republican for saying that. We don't want big government from Tallahassee dictating what happens down here in Hillsborough County. But the story of that attempt to expand the number of county commissioners from the 7 we have right now to 9 single-member districts, right? That's what you're alluding to.
Which means I would only have one member representing me on the county commission.
Right. That is a plan that originated, sometime during or right after COVID, back when one of our former county commissioners, who is now a state representative, Michael Owen, was on the county commission. They tried to railroad it through a plan to do it. It didn't go far when he was on the county commission. Then he left the county commission, went up to Tallahassee.
Very quickly. I don't think he even served more than a couple of years in that seat.
I don't know. My view on public services is certainly you should not be viewing it as some kind of stepping stone to something. That's kind of crazy to me. But anyway, he went up to Tallahassee, and he tried to craft legislation to do the exact same thing, but for every single county based on population. It died in committee. Tried to do it again this session. We'll see what happens with it. But they also are trying with the Charter Review Board to push something like this through. Now, the honest, truth about it is, on the surface level, some of the arguments that they're making, it seem to make sense. They're like, okay, there's a lot of growth in our county. There's areas, for instance, like East County where I grew up, South County where I work, and East County as well. There's so much growth, and Miller, who's the commissioner, who is a single member district representative for District 4, which is at East and South County, getting jam-packed full of like tickets and requests and needs from the residents. And some of the other ones, it's not as equitable, right? According to her. The answer to that is not to literally change the charter, in my view. The answer to that is hire another aide.
And not give us less representation. I mean, you can redistrict and make one district 2 districts and have 5 districts.
That's specifics. A possibility, but honestly, when the Charter Review Board process happened, it was multiple, once a month, for a lot. You can go back and look at the YouTube recordings from last year. Former county commissioner Mariella Smith actually came up and spoke as a countywide commissioner, and she said, "Hey, you get all those tickets, you got all those requests, you got all those needs. You just got to work hard." You know what I mean? And you know what you're getting into when you run for that office. But the other thing I think is that the role of a countywide commissioner is you're going to be filling in the gaps where the gaps are, right?
For sure.
You got to be able to, I will be
100%.
there to help whether you're Republican or Democrat as a single member district
Yes.
to be able to fill in the needs for our residents.
Yeah.
Because what they're not telling you is, as much as they talk certain arguments on the surface level, what they don't mention at the Charter Review Board is they have a map already pre-drawn for those 9 single-member districts to gerrymander our county such that we, in perpetuity, have 7 Republicans and 2 Democrats.
Yeah.
And so what seems like, there's some merits here or there to some of the message, we always have to question who is the messenger. Can we trust what their really intent?
100%. And speaking about that, one of the things you said that was on your platform is affordability, right? I mean, that's a hot topic now.
It is, yeah.
I think that's one of the issues when we talk about everybody feeling it, unless you're part of the 1%, prices are just out of control everywhere. The ridiculousness of our utility bills are just something that I see. I'm in a lot of local community social media groups, and I see everywhere people just, saying that they can't afford their light bills or their electricity. I feel like, and you can tell me what you're seeing, right now, the kind of Republican response to the affordability crisis is to just take away all taxes, right? Like that's the magic bullet. Taxes are the big,
Right.
evil thing in your life that's driving everything up. And, really, that's what's providing social services. And when you talk about, taking on developers, right? Or like in education, one of the things I was going to bring up is what would really help us, because, a lot of times from a school board perspective, when I go to these events and somebody who cares about education will ask somebody running for city council or county commission, how can you help education? And the answer is usually like, oh, we're separate entities and the school board's in charge of education, but impact fees are set by the county commission. And those are the fees that go to help build the schools. And those have not been raised to meet the building prices in so long that when you talk about expansion in South County or these areas that are growing, because honestly, people can't afford to live in the city of Tampa anymore. So they're moving out to these rural areas. And we can't afford to build the schools because it costs us so much more. Impact fees, is something else. And those are usually typically the county is hesitant to raise those because developers make less money if they have to pay more impact fees.
I know.
So when you talk about affordability, other than just cutting taxes, how do you see your role on the county commission being able to make this city more affordable for everybody?
I do think that it goes back to what I was saying before about who has their thumb on the scale. When we talk about impact fees, when we talk about, making sure that, the infrastructure keeps up with growth, it's a question of is the taxpayer going to be paying for that more, or is the developer who's building that new development going to be paying for that? There's got to be a mix. There's no doubt about it, right? I don't think our impact fees are probably where they need to be in terms of being able to keep up with growth. We are actually relatively low here compared to any other place in the state.
And I think the state is even doing legislation where you can't raise them a certain percentage
and
to
so,
even meet because
we need to be able to
even if the people vote in people friendly people at the local level, the state wants to make sure that the developers
are taken care of, right? And don't get me wrong, Jessica, like as I say all this, there are a lot of responsible and good developers. I am for sustainable development, right? Not anti-development by any means, right?
We're going to develop.
We have to in order to be able to meet our growth, but it's important that infrastructure keeps up with it. And the only way to do that is be able to pay for it, and it shouldn't come on the backs of taxpayers, right? Now, what I will say is that we can be thoughtful as well about where and how we kind of manage our impact fees to incentivize certain type of construction and incentivize certain types of buildings. Like, childcare is actually one example of that. To incentivize, for instance, if a developer is building a big development down in South County, right? We can say, okay, let's make it easier for you to build that daycare center. Let's make it easier for you to build that, additional element of childcare, after school care or whatnot. That I think is so critical for us to be able to ensure that these communities reflect the needs of working families, particularly young families like my own, and
Right.
I always put myself in the shoes of those who are just trying to get by and don't necessarily see themselves in the politics. Now, beyond that, right? We have the conversation about affordable housing, which can means so many different things. It's become such
been a
a
buzzword for every
confusing and
county
ambiguous
commission race since
topic.
I've been paying attention.
I know. And, it's important, in talking about this, to talk about it from the context of how are we going to be sure that, that young professional doesn't have to live across county lines just to be able to get in to Tampa, or, that teacher in Carrollwood is able to live, close to where they work.
100%,
And,
yeah.
I think, the nurse at TGH who has to live in, Wesley Chapel,
Right.
just be able to be anywhere close to TGH where they work. And then they have to get up at 4:30 a.m. to be able to make it to the hospital
Quality
by
of
7,
life.
right? Affordable housing investment is something that we can be thoughtful of as a county. The Hope Affordable Housing Fund is one example of that. And that's one thing I do want to make sure we talk about.
Isn't that the one that gets rated all the time for other projects? Okay.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? It's $10 million of our county budget. Remember, we were talking about our county budget being $12 billion plus.
Right.
Still, every single dollar of taxpayer money's got to be accounted for.
For sure.
But what this is important, and why this is important is, back in, I believe, 2019, all 7 county commissioners voted bipartisan, nature to approve this plan to create a seed grant to bring in matching federal dollars, matching dollars from elsewhere to create affordable housing units throughout our county. From 2019 to 2024, it was responsible for the creation of more than 1,100 affordable housing units. Think of how many families that helped and impacted, right? Yet, when the current makeup of the county commission came in, which, is 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats, right? They voted to slash the fund by 80%. Then again, 80%.
Wow.
Yeah. And then just this year, or I should say 2025, they actually voted to eliminate the fund through great local advocacy, actually from this organization called Hope, which we'll talk about as well. It's an interfaith group of churches, mosques.
Yeah, I have a meeting
temples.
with them next week, actually.
they're a good group. The church that Rachel and I and now Miriam go to, Sacred Heart, just joined it. So it's actually 13,500 congregants in total. It's a huge number of folks here in the county advocated and actually worked to get some of that money back. But you look at funds like that and you look at what an impact it makes. I'm all for being sure that we are good stewards of taxpayer dollars.
Sure.
But there is a role for government. Government can do things that no private corporation or private group or entity can do, whether it be building and taking care of the roads, or being targeted and surgical in how we invest our money to make life better for the people here in Hillsborough.
Nice way to bring back that surgeon reference right there. I see what you did there. I liked it. You're going to be surgical about it. Okay, so it's brave to go up and say that you want to support the people as opposed to developers, because I don't think people realize how much money developers sink into, even in the school board races. I was surprised by how much money went into school board races. And so it's pretty brave, to say that you want to be an elected official for the people and not for, the powers of be, developers and all the people who have kind of run the city for a really long time. So I give you credit for that. And I agree. I understand, there has to be development. Just by saying you want responsible development doesn't mean you're going against all developers. But, I don't know if people understand how much money gets sunk. So that sounds like you're up against, a pretty tall order, but you've raised a pretty good amount of money. I mean, I think there was just a headline, surprised by how much money that you've raised already in your raise. So how are you doing that?
So I'll tell you, I think the reason why a lot of candidates, particularly for county commission and local races, don't say anything about development and just kind of either keep their mouth shut or maybe say a little bit and then they completely go 180 after getting elected is because, and I see how the sausage is made now. There's so much money that developers can and special interests and big corporate interests can plug into these races.
Through PACs.
But we are so fortunate to have won the trust of so many folks in Hillsborough County. We raised something more than $121,000 is what the Tampa Bay Times reported in the article earlier this week. But the number that I'm proudest of is we had 500 plus donors.
Yeah.
And, that tells us that there's something to be said about a grassroots initiative here. Now, I and I say this certainly as somebody who's never run for office before. Money in politics, I think it's kind of a twisted concept. But
Oh, that's a plug for repealing Citizens United.
Yeah, I would say. But I'm a pragmatist, right? And whether it be like the decisions that come up on a county commission level, or even just how we run this race, we know that we need money in order to get our message out to a county of almost 1.6 million people. I know for a fact, as much as I'm going to do my darndest to achieve this, I may not be able to knock on every single door in this county, right? There are some folks who have a fence that have a no trespassing sign, so don't worry, I won't be knocking on your door if you do that. But, I had to find a way to be able to reach you somehow, right? To be able to bring the message for our campaign. But I'm also called to ensure that there continues to be a light of accountability and transparency that characterizes our Hillsborough County Commission, even after we get elected.
Wow. I love that. Apparently these days, those are dirty words from what I hear. So I'm glad that you're not afraid to say those. All right. Let me ask you about something that I see a lot of people responding to right now. When it comes to vaccines, since you're a doctor, where is the role in county commission as, when we talk about healthcare and public health safety, where do you see that role, and what's your thought process on kind of what's going on around vaccines right now?
I think it's important to speak truth to power. I think it's important to meet people where they're at. One thing that I'm extremely cognizant of is that the discussion about vaccines has characterized this moment in our nation and the world, and just general discussion of public health as a whole is, vaccines are what's at the surface level, right? But what the deeper seated thing is a mistrust in the healthcare establishment as a whole.
Yeah.
And some of those concepts apply to government as well. In the conversation about property taxes, some of it's about the taxes, but a large part of it is also mistrust in government officials as a whole, right?
Right.
I think it's important to, allow people a space to be heard, to understand their concerns, maybe filter out the folks who are coming in with bad faith. I'm not necessarily going to listen to the guy or gal who entire business is, holistic, I'm going to do acupuncture to cure your prostate cancer per se, right? Because that person is not wanting to help people, I think. But that being said, I try to meet people where they're at, understanding, however, that the issue of vaccines is one that affects all of us.
Yeah.
Right? It's one thing if you decide to drive drunk on a dark road out in the middle of nowhere, and the only person you hurt is yourself when you crash into a tree. Right? There's nothing altogether to drive drunk on I-75 here in Hillsborough County, because you're going to hurt a lot of folks if you don't, follow a certain set of rules, right? And I think that there's something to be said about our social contract here in America, where there is a trade-off of a little bit of personal freedom in order to ensure that we as a whole are better off, right? And when we talk about where we are in the state of Florida, even before the Surgeon General and DeSantis went to my home town of Valrico and made that announcement that they wanted to get rid of vaccine requirements in schools here in Hillsborough County, within the state of Florida, and everybody was clapping about it. Before that, Florida already had pretty lenient religious and philosophical ideologic exemptions for vaccines,
right.
And we respected parents' right to choose. The problem, however, with them beating the war drum, right, in regards to this, is it further sows mistrust in what we know has saved millions upon millions of lives, vaccines, and parents are forced asking questions: should we? Could be. Without those requirements, it's likely that some insurers are not going to cover it. And, some families, particularly in underserved communities here in Hillsborough County, right, are going to have to make a decision between groceries.
I had never thought about it that way before.
Or vaccines, right? The other thing, too, is, what about we think about the freedom for the parents and the kids who are probably, may or may not be okay, who knows? But what about the freedom of folks like my daughter, right, who is too young to get all their vaccines, or immunocompromised patients, and other patients or kids who, are going to be very vulnerable
and
regardless of vaccines.
In the classroom and
listen,
right?
There's in East Texas, I believe, where a lot of this conversation happened. We don't have to go that far in the history books we just have to go back to last year to see, case examples of how this has failed. That anti-vax sentiment where there was a preponderance of students who were unvaccinated, led to, I believe it was measles, being caught by a teacher who was actually vaccinated. Levels had gotten so out of control that it endangered our teachers.
Right.
You're going to see classrooms shut down because kids are going to get sick, beyond a certain level, right? How can you be a good steward of taxpayer dollars if you're talking about?
Won't let you shut those classrooms down.
Yeah.
But anyway, I digress.
But getting back though to the role of county government, right? To some extent, with our health services department, and we have a county health care plan. It's important that we continue to provide coverage from a primary care standpoint to ensure that people are able to get access to vaccines. One, two, it's important that we do everything we can to be transparent about data. If the state won't do it, like COVID somehow doesn't exist, by the way, because we don't record it anymore, right? Here on the county level, we can do the best we can to be transparent with our citizens, take care of our own people here in our bubble of Hillsborough County, the oasis that is Hillsborough. And then third, I think more than anything, and this is a critical thing, we have to question what the values are of our leaders. There is a truth with a capital T, right? And we have to stand up for it and speak to it, because if we don't, then that is a miscarriage of justice.
Well, on that kind of note, I feel like all this fear mongering, and as I mentioned before, kind of using these issues to get people to vote against their own their self-interest with misinformation. You mentioned fluoride in the water.
Yeah.
And thank you to, I believe the charge was led by County Commissioner Wastel, which you're not running against, so I won't use this opportunity to talk about the horrible reign of terror that he's basically forced on Hillsborough County residents, because hopefully I'll have his opponent on. But he did spearhead taking fluoride out of our water. Yeah. What are your concerns about the ramifications of that?
I think that I'll put it to you this way. There are decades upon decades of data, science supporting the notion that additional fluoride in the water will ensure that there is a reduction in dental cavities, particularly for kids and also for adults. There are ways to add fluoride on your own, that are accessible to folks who don't have to think about deciding between groceries and having fluoride added to their fluoride additives, right? People in more affluent communities. But I really worry, and my heart aches for the people who don't have the ability to buy fluoride and do it on their own, don't have that individual freedom because of economics. And, a cruel machine has not allowed them that, right?
What about the notion that fluoride's bad for you?
So there's some discussion that's not based in science and truth, right? That fluoride could cause autism, but
I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah, this is something that it's like, it's a freeze question, but like it's like the equivalent of going into watch Lord of the Rings in the movie theater and yelling fire.
Lord of the Rings, you say,
and yelling fire and everybody, running. A lot of people know there is not a fire and can see with their eyes and ears what works and doesn't work. And half of them might stick in that movie theater, but another half are going to be running out, and some people are going to get lost in the stampede. The folks who are going to get lost in the stampede here in Hillsborough, I worry, are the folks in the underserved communities.
And who probably can't afford dental care.
100%. Yeah. Right.
So speaking about, this is kind of the last thing I'm going to talk on County Commission. And then, I want to talk about how people can help your campaign and some cool things that you're doing. But one of the things that I've seen from the school board member is a lot of our, I say this often, and it shocks people, but 40% of our students live in the poverty level, 40%. And so a lot of our schools have become community schools, and a lot of what those community schools do is handle food insecurity. We have a lot of, food banks that in our actual schools to make sure that our kids, in between when they're not at school, their families are getting access to food because, if you're hungry, you're not in a position to learn.
100%.
And so much of what we relied on was feeding Tampa Bay. And with the reduction and the cuts of so many not-for-profits and social services that have given so much to our community and provided that infrastructure that we talk about, access to services that so many people rely on. We're seeing firsthand that food insecurity grow, the amount of food that Feeding Tampa Bay can provide our schools, especially fresh food,
100%.
is dwindling, and that's immediately having an effect on our students. What are some of the other big cuts? I know there was something in Waimama that supported some of our families that was cut. I know there's been, I mean, every board that I sit on that's an art board, there's been cuts across the state and cuts across the county. What are some of the other cuts, and is that a priority for you if you were on the board to reinstate that and fight for that, and why?
So it's important to keep in mind that we're in this aura, this miasma of discussion of what we call waste, fraud, and abuse in government. Right. And it's important that we are good stewards of taxpayer dollars. Waste, fraud, and abuse exists in certain places in government, and county government is no exception to that. And it's important that we root it out. And again, be surgical about cutting it out. But right now, the folks who talk about waste, fraud, and abuse are folks who I have no idea why we trust anything that's coming out of their mouth, right? We have a person who's running for CFO, has a political agenda, makes up numbers about Hillsborough County and the quote unquote waste, fraud, abuse that exists in our county. And you got these indeed extremist county commissioners like the person I'm running against, and folks that you've mentioned on the show, who are more in service to ideology and party than they are to the people of Hillsborough County, using these not-for-profits, using organizations, which I'll talk about in a second, as scapegoats. They're actually a fraction of the county budget. This isn't free money that's getting thrown out to special interest groups. My vision for county government is such that, there's a role for government. There's things that government can do better than anybody else. And I truly do believe that if we actually invest in it and we actually put thoughtful, competent people in who are driven by some degree of service to the people that elected them, or who have been appointed and elected and hired by the government. But there's something to be said about limited government, which where the boundaries end and private citizens take over. And these organizations, fill that gap. I'll give you two examples. One is Enterprising Latinas, which was a group that was cut by my opponent, the incumbent. It actually led the charge for this, down in Waimama. That funding for that group was actually funding that came from federal entity, and the county was just supposed to pass through. Just thumbs up, you get it, right? We paid as Hillsborough County residents into a federal pot. We got to do everything we can to bring back federal money. What the group Enterprising Latinas does is it's started by a group of Enterprising Latinas, great people, great leaders in the community, but it doesn't just serve Latinas. Right? That's how the ideologues tried to portray it. No, it actually serves everybody in Waimama, everybody in South County, to promote economic development. And we as a county, and our government, actually, we had very deep partnerships with them. An example is, I went not long ago, recently to walk by Enterprising Latinas office there. They had a whole cubicle, a whole desk area, an office area set out for Career Source, which is a group and a board that is instrumental in cultivating and nurturing economic opportunities and job opportunities for people in certain areas. And so, this was very, very important in a place like South County, yet, the people on the county commission wanted to slash the funding to it. Another group is ECHO out in East County. ECHO is an amazing group that, connects people who have lost jobs to employers, addresses issues of food insecurity, addresses issues of clothing insecurity and whatnot, and just provides for people where they're in need. Feeding Tampa Bay, when they tried to cut the funding for that, they met an abundance of public outrage because, Feeding Tampa Bay has done so much for people who are in need in our county. And I will say that it's important now more than ever that we ensure that the people who have values that are driven by competence, decency, compassion, and a thirst for justice are elected to the county commission, because a lot more than just government and public services rely on it.
Or can we just start with people who have values?
That's basic.
I heard a rumor. I don't know if this is true or you can speak to it or not. But speaking of public entities. I think the incumbent who you're running against was living in public housing when she was elected, and then shortly after voted against the same to cut funding from the same public housing she lived in. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, it's actually the Hope Affordable Housing Fund, which I refer to. And it's beyond comprehension to me how you close the door behind you.
Yeah.
Quite literally, after you quote unquote make it, right? She lived in taxpayer subsidized, affordable housing.
Yeah.
The year prior to getting elected, got elected, made a little bit more in her salary, right? And she moved into they were able to afford a home and it just shut the door behind her. Yeah. All the other folks who needed help, who needed assistance, needed that safety net.
Voted against her own neighbors.
And to some extent, yes, it's a testament to her and how she does things. But I think in a larger sense, it's a testament to where we've gotten in our politics, the lack of accountability, the cynicism and whatnot that kind of drives a lot of the decision makers we put into office. And so much of it is because we as a citizen aren't paying attention.
100%. Yeah. And that's going to lead me to what I want to talk about at civil engagement. I also do want to point out to our listeners, to anyone who cares about education, that the county commission voted to take away a percentage of the school board's cut of the CIT tax, and also tried to stop our referendum, which is paying our employees a livable wage at this point, from even making it on the ballot.
Yep,
so
absolutely.
Even if you just care about education and you listen because of that, it's so important because we do have a stronger relationship. We do have an interlocal agreement with county commission.
100%.
And there is a relationship there.
One issue we have so often is that we silo off each of the departments, even within county center.
Yeah.
But and so often school board, the county, we're not, county commission, we're not working in as much in tandem as we should.
Yeah.
Same applies to our elected officials in the city of Tampa. Same applies to the city of Temple Terrace, even, right? To the city of Plant City, right? Yeah. There needs to be better collaboration. 100%. It shouldn't be about party. It should be about service to the people.
Yeah. All right. So, we're talking about civil engagement. Who knows how many people even made it this far. But if they did, why do you think there's such a lack of a civil engagement? Why do you think people, I think one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast, and I do have a challenge for everybody listening that I'm going to say at every single one. My challenge is that every single person who's listening should know who represents them on every level.
Yeah.
That if you're listening to this podcast and you have no idea who your county commissioner is, if you live in the city of Tampa, if you have a city council person, who your legislator is, who your school board member is, I challenge every single person to know that. There's multiple websites you can look up, find my House of Representative, find my senator, find my county commissioner. You put in your zip code, you put in your address, and bam, you've got it. But why do you think people are so disengaged on the local level with, as you made the point, and I make the point every time, local politics has so much more of an effect on your life than whatever's happening on the national level? Why are people checked out, and how do we get them reengaged?
It's not just a Hillsborough County issue. It's not just a 2026 issue.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some, by design, lack of accountability and transparency as it relates to local affairs, because when there's lack of accountability and transparency, there's more opportunities for corruption. But I also can attest to my own life experience. I was in 6th grade when 9/11 happened. And my generation as a millennial, we've seen war after war. We've seen economic crisis after economic crisis. And we've been screaming to avoid for a couple of decades. So often we see that our politics does not reflect us. We put up the mirror and it's, the elected officials are not us. And I think it's so important that people feel heard and seen. I like to think that, whenever I beat Donna Cameron Zapata or Stacey Hahn, they're living in our county. I will be representing them. I will hear them. May have bad ideas, but still, we'll be able to find common ground no matter who you are, for the most part. And because we're all one Hillsborough County. That's something that's harder to say in DC and Tallahassee. I cannot attest to solve the crisis in Venezuela or Gaza or Minneapolis, right? But I can do everything in my power, be fighting for the people here within our boundaries to protect us no matter what threats are outside of these walls.
So you're people's candidate is what you're saying.
I'm a people's candidate.
So if we're the people, we should vote for you.
Absolutely.
Speaking of voting for you and your campaign, tell me, I'm a listener. I love what you're saying. Where do you need help? How can I plug in? How can people get involved? Tell the people who are like, this is the one, we need him on county commission, how they can get involved with your campaign. How can people help?
My name is Neil Manimala, and you can go to my website at neilmanimala.com. What we need right now are volunteers and donations.
What do you need?
So volunteers can take many different forms. Mm-hmm. So everybody's got different skills. Yeah. I talk to folks who are extroverts. I talk to folks who are introverts. Mm-hmm. I talk to folks who know every single person on their street and neighborhood. Yeah. I talk to folks who only know the people that they meet on Fortnite, right? Mm-hmm. And it's important to understand that everybody's got a role to play, and there's an opportunity for them to get back. I think most people I've talked with, no matter what their political affiliation, no matter what party they grew up with, understand we're living in this a national nightmare right now, that the direction we're going, there's something off. And there's a certain sense of cruelty and disconnection that has kind of so defined our human interactions in this era. And we really are at a turning point where we can pull back from that. But it has to start here on a local level. I really do believe that in my heart, and that's why I'm running for this, because I want to be able to bring back that decency and bring back people's desire to be plugged into the political process. Politics right now is a dirty word. People ask me why you go from being one of the most trusted professions in the world, being a physician, to one of the least trusted professions, being a politician. We got to change what politics is about, because if not, then, like, what seeds are we planting for my daughter's generation? Right?
So if people go to your website, they want to volunteer, they want to hold a sign on the side of the road, they want to make some phone calls. Do you have a volunteer website?
So you go on the website, you literally just plug in your details. There's things you can check off, because not just about knocking on doors and holding up signs.
Is there a tab that says volunteers that they would click?
Yes. Well, actually on the front page, you can actually press join the campaign and put in your info, because that'll go straight to me. They'll go straight to me and my volunteer coordinator. We're putting it all around the county. Okay. And I say that because what volunteering looks like is, if you even if you just want to stay at home and help me with some graphic design, right, on some of the things I'm putting out, or help me manage some of my social media, right? There is also an element of the campaign that involves continuing to raise funds. No matter how you dice it, I'm David versus the Goliath of a Republican machine. And part of why I'm raising funds is I know that whoever I'm running against is going to be putting out mailers about that brown guy with a beard. I want to be able to put out mailers that
you'll be lucky if that's the
or
that's
social media. The handsome brown guy with a beard. Yeah. But all that being said, I want to have all options available for messaging and reaching out to people. And so one thing that I invite people to do, besides volunteering and signing up on the website, and donating to our campaign at neilmanimala.com, is also opening up your home or civic association to meet. And the reason why I say that, especially at this stage of the campaign, is yes, if you're a Democrat or independent listening to this, right? Maybe I'm speaking to 5 Democrats there and a group of 10, but the other 5 might be independents or Republicans, right? There's no space I will not go to be able to get our message out and be able to reach people and hear their concerns, right? And understand where they're coming from. And it's been beautiful to see the coalition that we've already started to plant the seeds for, but we need to keep that going because we have such a big county. And what I will say is we each have our stories and talents and skills and testimonies. My testimony and story opens up a certain set of doors. Yours and yours and others open up other sets of doors that I may not necessarily have access to.
Grassroots, right? Yeah.
And so I'll go to your church. I'll go to your HOA.
Your mosque.
I'll go to your mosque.
Your temple.
I'll go to your temple. I'll go anywhere. I have some of my friends down in South County tell me, Neil, are you sure you want to go to my HOA? It's 90% Republican. That's exactly where I'm going to go. Right?
Right.
And there's no tough questions or questions that are too tough, because at the end of the day, like, as long as we're in a room in good faith and they're there because they want to hear and listen and share with me, their stories and what's hurting them, I'm here to take it. That's the role of a county commissioner. I also want to share myself. Okay. Because whether it be a pothole in front of your road or a big transit idea, I want to be able to hear that from you, both during the campaign and after getting elected on November 3rd. My cell is 813-530-6313. And that's Neil Manimala, M-Animal-A. And I invite any and all folks to call or text me. Ideally not at 2 a.m. That's when I get pages and stuff from the hospital with my other job. But no, I really do mean it when I say I want to be accessible. And that's, I think, honestly, the role of any elected official, certainly your local official.
Yeah, too many people have my cell phone number. I can tell you that. And everybody has the time to call you on the weekend and the holiday, where I'm like, call me back on Monday.
Yeah, exactly.
But I love that. I shared my phone number all throughout the campaign. I feel like that is true transparency. So thank you for sharing that. So if I want to get involved, I can be a volunteer. I can do a donation. No small donations are discouraged. If you can do $5, $10, $20. I mean, I'm sure you love those big donations, especially where you are. But I think a lot of people feel like, oh, I only have $5 to give. It's not worth it.
That's huge.
But,
I had a guy come up to me and give me $1.
Yeah.
The documentation of how we got that $1 probably was worth more than that $1, but still, I was super proud of that donation too.
So just give it whatever you can. And we've talked a long time. I don't want to cut it short, but I know you're off to Fortnite Fridays, which is super cool. Sounds like you're meeting people where they're at the gaming sites, and I think that's so important. So if you do game and you like Fortnite, find you on Fortnite Fridays.
Fortnite Friday. I got my Instagram, I got my Facebook, but the other social media I'm on is like Discord. So you can find me on Discord, Vote Manimala. And honestly, it's just an opportunity to meet people where they're at. Not everybody's going to go to a canvassing event or a political event. And some people, politics, like I said, it's a bad word. Yeah. Let's change that. Let's just have a conversation about your traffic or your day or yes, we can talk about Venezuela if you want, but we can talk about whatever, right?
So is there anything that we haven't covered in these last few minutes that you want to say? I mean, we've talked about a lot. So is there anything else you want to add before we end our show?
I just want to say I really appreciate you. And I appreciate the folks who've come before me in public service. The people like Phyllis Busansky, who was a Lionheart of Hillsborough County, taught us that compassion and looking after your neighbor, thinking about those on the margins, it was not a liability or weakness. It was actually a strength. It made us stronger as a county. And I really do believe a rising tide lifts all ships. This is something that we really need to be thoughtful about and reflect on and be committed to making a difference. Come November 3rd, 2026, we're at a turning point here in Hillsborough County. So I invite you all to join me, neilmanimala.com, be a part of this campaign as we push for change, focused on the people.
Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on a Friday night. New father, surgeon, running a campaign and giving us your time so people get to know you. I appreciate it. If you love what you hear, November, vote District 5, County Commission, Countywide for, I'm going to say Dr. Neil. That's what I'm saying. Dr. Neil.
Dr. Neil, just call me Neil. But honestly, I'm blessed. And, again, we'll, hopefully have a chance to chat again at some point soon.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you again. Thank you for everybody who's listened. Again, this has been Reclaiming My Mind. I've given a challenge. If you don't know who your local elected officials are at every level, I'm going to say it every time. Make sure you go out and find who is representing you so you can hold them accountable. Make sure you know the election dates that are coming up. Make sure that you are a registered voter. There's, lots of purges to get people who are used to voting by mail off the vote by mail. So make sure you go on our supervisor of election. We have a great supervisor of election. Make sure you're registered to vote. Your ballot's going to come to you. Be prepared in November that your voice is heard and the candidates you want to support, you know who they are and you're there to vote for them. Thank you as always, for listening. We're super excited to kick off Meet Our Candidate season. We will have another candidate who is running for Congress, actually, 13th District over in Pinellas on Sunday. So we're excited about that. And stay safe out there. It's kind of wild these days. Take care. Signing off.